Next question from Noah, which is I enjoyed the games to play feature on the YouTube channel. We'll stop just for a second there. When I first read that, I thought to myself, well, good for you, but I don't follow some games to play feature, so how am I supposed to know whatever it is you're asking? Then I realized he was talking about me, and that in fact I did have a few videos about games that I liked or was interested in playing that I hadn't played or had played very little. They included a wide variety. Actually, there was one of the versions of Mutant Chronicles. There's Odd Soot. There's Chronicles of Skin and a bunch of others that I had made little videos about. So, well, I'm glad you liked those. Didn't think of those as a thing, or had forgotten about them as a thing. Well, the question goes on. Are there any lesser known games that have been on your radar to play lately or recently? If so, what in the content or procedures is inspiring for you? In a lot of ways, that is sort of my natural state, is basically having a bunch of games floating in and out of my perceptions as things that I would grab to play. And then we put those in the subset of games that I have not played or have played only very little. So it so happens that statistically, those end up being games that I suppose you could call little known. But my point being is that they float in and out, right, of my mind. I can be really interested in one for a while. The chance to play it doesn't come up, and it hits the shelf again. And I remember, oh shoot, never got around to that one. But something else has cropped up. Then there's the difficulty that I necessarily, because I play with other humans, have to be thinking about what's a good game to bring, for this set of people in this particular context. Is it practical, to start playing, X? And if so, especially if it's a game with some sort of long-term set of features and it doesn't seem practical to play it for long-term, well, what about it in the short term seems, fun or interesting or worth checking out? In all of that context, the immediate answer right off the top, and here's the issue too, little known, I don't know, little known or not. I mean, there are some people who would probably argue with me when I say Harnmaster. The number of people might say, little known, what are you talking about? That's a game. That's a known game. Well, okay. Call it what you want. I could make the case that 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons is little known if we're talking about, the capacity to actually play by anything resembling the textual rules. So I don't really know, lesser or little known as a standard. I can't say. That depends on the community or whatever. I could very well say that until the last couple of weeks, playing Spione would be very much, one of my own games, very much on my mind and very much desired. And I have had, the chance to jump back into it recently. So anyway, Hardmaster, and then let's go ahead and continue with the question. What sort of features are interesting you? I posted a little bit about this on the Patreon, in that play with a very heavy focus on kind of low-tech life and ordinary actions. And what that would be like. And whether that's associated with what we might call, low-level magic or low-rent magic or hedge magic or whatever, that seems to be implicated to a lot of people. That may or may not apply, to Hardmaster in the long run, but in the short run, that seems to apply. There are elements of that kind of play that I'd like to develop, and that game keeps drawing my attention back to it. Every time I look through it, there's various weird features about it, or unusual features about it that made me say, ooh, that's kind of interesting. Being able to obviously getting to play one of the strains of orc is a low probability, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. You may well end up with, one of those in play. And even if you don't, and even if the dice, behave very probabilistically and we end up with a bunch of, high-ranking serfs and, low-ranking freemen and, various professions like, candle makers and fishermen and stuff like that. That's fine. That's fine. There's room to play in that zone. And I'm interested in that. Whether we do have diverse, types or diverse classes, somebody, hits the jackpot and ends up playing with a wizard worthy, nobleman or something. It's pretty unlikely, but that doesn't mean it can't happen. Dice are dice. I'm interested in what play is like. There are plenty of games that I think are well suited to that, but Hardmaster has an interesting artifact. Very early form, by the way. I think it's actually the first or second form that I have, is where I would go for it. So let's see. I am always, looking through my shelf of fantasy heartbreakers, and the one that is my kind of cry myself to sleep at night one is Dark Earth Legends, that I would love to be playing the hell out of long term, but it just doesn't seem to keep hopping into the queue with the right people at the right time. I'll actually be playing a session of it at LinCon, and I hope that kind of gets my gears going for how to organize more sustained play with people I live near. So that hasn't stopped me, of course, from grabbing another game off the shelf from the Heartbreakers, and I'm looking again at Deathstalkers, which is an excessive, gaudy pile, just madness, but cannot get my eyes off of that combat system. I mean, there's a really, really fascinating stuff there. These people played the hell out of it, and they know their combat system, and they explain it carefully, and you're looking at it going, I have never played anything quite like that. I want to try that. So I could go on and on, though. That's the problem. I mean, I'm surrounded by role-playing games, and many, many of them I have not played, and many, many of them may well qualify as lesser known to everybody, let alone, this or that sector. So, I could almost throw a dart and answer. But those two are the ones that have sort of crossed my brain in the last, in recent memory. One last point about this, a game that proves itself as, more fun to play than you thought, or fun enough that everybody wants to keep going, or that you yourself, want to play again, perhaps with, other people, when you get the chance. Games by Joe and Kathleen Williams, the two of their three that I've played, both seem to have done that. Legendary Lives and Chaotic. Basically, once you play them, I could play that one again, I say, anyway. And so it's sort of the curse of success, right? This game kind of booms on you, and you end up playing the hell out of it and showcasing lots of things, and all kinds of discussions occur about it and things like that. And then, you're the next fellow on your shelf that you were going to play with people when you got the chance, well, that chance has, marched away into the future for you. So that's my state for those. Noah has another question concerning Champions Now, which far more specific, far more focused, and I wrote it, so it's a different kind of question. He says, I'm playing a spectral hero, Suleiman the Jinn, in a Champions Now game. Jinn, I should say. He's got a few levels of D-Solid and 4 hexes of stretching. Okay, now the important part, and I'm glad he put this here. I want to have an, this guy's everywhere quality in combat with mortal opponents. And as usual, one of the primary factors in playing Champions Now instantly asserts itself. There aren't non-superhero mortal opponents in terms of the ordinary exercise of one's powers. They're hazards. They're hazards you can fight, and we use the hazard rules. And one of the qualities of hazards, actually, there's three important things that define a hazard. One is, what does it do? Over what area does it have these dice of this set of powers as an impact? And it just does. It doesn't roll to hit or anything. It just, when the hazard acts, that happens in that space. And then the second quality is, what features might you have that render you able to ignore it? Just ignore it. So it could be anything, or more than one thing. So one might say, well, here's, a gang of thugs brandishing their pistols, but if you have acrobatics, screw it. Jump around them all you want. If you're using your acrobatics, they ain't hitting you. So the whole idea of rolls to hit and most of the mechanics of the powers don't really apply. Especially because, and I'm continuing here with a footnote, especially because for hazards you can fight, you knock out a hex of them with an attack, or more than one hex with some form of area attack. And you do that just by hitting. You do it by, you knock out that hazard. You remove that hex of it from its status as a hazard. It can no longer, do that thing from that hex because some piece of it is gone. And that applies to squads of people running around just as much as it may apply to some great big stationary monster machine. So, again, we're not using the same rules you would use to battle some, 200 plus point, opponent with a name. The third quality is whatever is applied or must be done so that the hazard is turned off. It's negated. Every hazard has to have all of those. And then if you want to define it as one or more creatures that you can actually, fight, then that adds on certain aspects, like that one I just mentioned. So if we're talking about mortal opponents, well, I presume you mean, ordinary people, or at least non-superpowered people, or the famed boogeyman of all Champions history, the trained agents. We're talking about hazards. And we then look and say, well, what is the nature of a hazard? Who says? Well, the Game Master makes up hazards. So the question is, does the Game Master understand your character such that the qualities of your character would be hell on wheels versus such opponents? And whether the Game Master wants to honor that desire on your part, or your vision of how this works, and whatever their vision is of how this works, this meaning, playing this game right now, well, there is going to be a synthesis of those two. And it may not be as much as you want, or it may be more than what you want. It all depends on where they're coming from and where you are. Can't say how that would be. Presuming that the Game Master reads that sentence and says, oh, wow, yeah, that's cool. This guy's hell on wheels against mortal opponents because he can be anywhere, or they feel he can. Then he should be writing his hazards that way, so that those qualities either make the character rather proof against their attacks, or basically really, really good at shutting those attacks down, or Both. Now, if we're still talking about using the fighting hazards rules so that we're not talking about an instant negation of the hazard, you still want to fight it. That's your vision. And if I were the GM who got that, right? Again, I'm talking about a synthesis of outlooks here. If in that synthesis that's a thing, that this guy's everywhere quality is there, but you actually do want to have to fight your way through the hazard. You don't want an easy out. Maybe having D-solid means that you're not easily hurt by them. So if you have D-solid, you're immune, but you still have to fight them to take it out. So they have a terrible time hitting you, whether it makes you completely immune or not, I don't know. But what I'm looking at is this 4 hexes of stretching. Champions now is, like the original game, very generous toward surprising things to do. So bonuses for attacking from somewhere unusual. So you got 4 hexes of stretching. Basically, that means you can be looking at a dude in the face and you just hit him from behind. Stuff like that. So what that means in terms of a hazard is that you can hit parts of the hazard that are 4 hexes away. So that creates very much the effect that I think you're talking about, which is that we see the character, spookily here, but then, the guy over there drops in his tracks, and, maybe the special effect is that, your dude is there too. Maybe that's what the stretching means. I'm not sure. But the notion that, he can strike anywhere among us or be anywhere among us to some extent in some spectral way, regardless of his literal hex location, in play as a target, that makes a lot of sense. The stretching will do that. And especially if I understand correctly that we're not really talking about Rubberman stretching, we're talking about, doing something with your reach over there. So with that in mind, there is also a somewhat generous way of working off of the special effects, which, since it's a special effect, may or may not apply in any instance and should not be expected to be consistent. Again, more of a game master thing than a it's on my sheet and it says I can do it thing. Which is, if you're up against a horde of dudes, and you've got 4 hexes of stretching, and if it's defined in this kind of spectral way, and we have this aesthetic of you kind of like sort of spectrally, suffusing the area and doing your will here and there among it, well, very generously, one might decide for a given combat, depending on all sorts of aesthetic variables of the moment, that against such a hazard, you're hitting 4 hexes, not 1. And that they could be any 4 hexes among that group. That's kind of cool. So the possibility of that, without the guarantee, is something I see when I look at the bit of information you've described. None of this is what you can go running off to a game master and say, Ron says I can do that. No, this is about the way you look at it and the way they look at it, the way they build their hazards, and the way special effects get interpreted. If you wanted to lock down such an effect as I just described, then we're talking about, getting area effect into some specific attack as part of the character's profile, and that's something you could build over time. If, for example, you have that special effect occur, once, and it's not guaranteed, but it was really cool when it happened, and you can say, I'd like to lock that down into something I just can do. And then, nothing wrong with a few points in elemental control toward that end. So I hope that makes some sense in terms of playing these powers to their fullest potential. The power descriptions are only a piece of the puzzle for that. But I hope I provided some of the other pieces in which their properties make sense toward the aesthetic that you're talking